The brother's was on a plane all night, and he's exhausted, but we would like to take some questions, and I'll let him moderate the questions for himself.
Can you give me a drink of water? Sure. So we know that some people might have to leave, so if they can leave quietly and quickly, then the others can begin to ask questions, and we can just move right along.
Yes, you've mentioned tonight several times sort of the formative experiences that you had as an adolescent, and we're all aware of how you kind of came upon the scene and as a college student. Could you tell us a little bit about those experiences in your high school and that time that must have been sort of fermenting your thoughts? And as a sort of second part to this question, and seeing your evolution as a revolutionary, could you tell us how you felt about Martin Luther King back then and how you feel about him today? Thank you.
Not a bad question. You know, I was born in the Caribbean. So, of course, I was born as a British subject in a colonial situation. But one of the positive things over American imperialism, British imperialism has is its sense of discipline in its educational system. The American system of education has no discipline at all. I remember as a young man in Trinidad when we went to classroom, when we entered the classroom, we had to stand until the professor came in, and when he decided we would sit, we would sit. And even in the class, you could hear a pin drop. So even if, as a student, your mind would wander away, you wouldn't want to concentrate, the atmosphere was such that sooner or later, you'd have to come back and concentrate. So when I first came to America, the first day of class, they were throwing erasers at the school teacher. I couldn't understand this. But it's, in Britain, they only have about 60 million. So they have to discipline the education to make sure they get something. In America, with 250 million, anything that happens, somebody gonna jump up somewhere. So that's there. So since I had a disciplined educational system, when I arrived in the United States, this discipline continued. I attended a high school in New York known as the Bronx High School of Science. This high school was a high school in which they were attempting, I came to find out later, to come and direct the energies of the young people who they considered were advancing in the culture, to direct them toward science because Russia was advancing in Sputnik, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and they definitely wanted to quickly catch up. But what I did, of course, here was that I began to take the science and apply it to revolution. So this school had there, as I said, I began reading Marx at 16, many people who were members of the Young Communist League and the Young Socialist Alliance. As a matter of fact, one very funny thing was that my ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. My name was Carmichael at that time, and the man who was sitting behind me, because we were, as students, we were seated alphabetically, was a man named Dennis. And we went to the school as freshmen. I played soccer, he played soccer, so we went out for soccer together. And since we were sitting in class together, within the first 6 weeks, we became very close. And I remember in the first 6 weeks, he invited me to a party at his house. You know, I looked at the address, Harlem. So I went, he had this party in Harlem, he lived in Harlem, that's where he lived. His father was polite, his mother was polite. I saw all these books, but I'm not thinking about anything. About 2 weeks later, one Italian student in the class calls me over, he said, "Why are you always with that filthy commie?" I said, "What commie?" "Yeah, filthy Gene Dennis." "Thank you. Gene Dennis, he ain't no commie." "Oh, you stupid, you don't know who his father is." So he started screaming. So I went to another student, I said, "Who's Gene Dennis' father?" "Well, don't you know who he is? Everybody knows who he is." "Why, that's Eugene Dennis, head of the Communist Party. He just went to jail for the Smith Act." Well, I was already in it now. I couldn't get out of it. So I said, well, that's their problem. If he's a communist and they let him or arrest him, that's their problem. So from my contacts here with these people, of course, I had a great chance of spending many nights at his house, seeing people who didn't even remember me, like Ben Davis. I knew them all. And they never knew it. When I was small, I was looking at them. And one of the first badges, political badges I wore was a sane nuclear policy, ban the bomb. Yeah. And then one of the second ones I probably wore constantly was fair play for Cuba, because I had the opportunity of going to high school when the Cuban Revolution came forward, and by chance I had a professor there in social science who was not backward, quite progressive, and encouraged and showed the contradictions of the Cuban Revolution. So of course I was able to follow it and of course become very inspired by it. At the same time, Bayard Rustin, a man who helped to organize the March on Washington, 1960 March on Washington, was conducting youth marches, taking youth students from New York, sending us to Washington, D.C. to picket the White House and the Supreme Court to speed up desegregation. The desegregating law had been passed by 1952, but nothing had been done, so these were pressure points. At the same time, there were picket lines against segregated facilities in the South, which I occupied myself in. So within these activities, as the high school students were the, how I began to cut my teeth consciously on political movement. My joining SNCC is very interesting. As a senior not joining, of course, as a senior in high school in 1960, SNCC was formed in March of 1960. I was in New York, I followed it. But I'd applied to Howard University to go there, but I also applied to some other schools. I was thinking about Howard, but in May of that year, my senior year, the House of Un-American Activities brought up Paul Robeson. And some of us were asked to go and picket, so Paul Robeson, I'd be glad to do that. So we went to picket, and there was mainly young communist people. Of course, I was not a member of the Communist Party, but anything just, I don't care who's doing it, I'm with you. So I went with them, and when I got to Washington, D.C., I was very surprised. There was a whole line of all these African students, protesting against HUAC, and they were under the Socialist Party. I said, wow, the Socialist Party got all these Africans in D.C.? So I went over there, I started talking to them. I found out that they were members of the Nonviolent Action Group, which was part of SNCC. But they were against HUAC anyway, so even though they were not members of the Socialist Party, they were just picketing. So I said, all y'all belong to SNCC? I said, yeah, well, I'm coming to Howard. So that's how I made my final decision to go to Howard and to join SNCC. So that's a little bit about my youth life. Now about the question of Dr. Martin Luther King. I have had the great pleasure, in my life of meeting and working with a lot of great men. I really have. This is one of the great things that I have, one of the great aspects of my work, for which money cannot pay me. I met Ho Chi Minh. I had lunch with him while he gave me advice while America was bombing North Vietnam. I've met Fidel Castro over the years. I sit and talk with him. He gives me advice. I meet with Yasser Arafat from time to time. He sits and gives me advice. I can see Muammar Gaddafi anytime I want. He will sit and give me advice. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Martin Luther King, with Kwame Nkrumah, with Kwame Ture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but of course, of all of them, I think I got the chance to work closer with Dr. King. Because, of course, at that time, we were both in the South, Southern Christian Youth Conference, Southern Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we were doing the same type of action. So I had the opportunity to know him from a long time ago, before he became Dr. King. I mean, we were working in the same place. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was in Greenwood, Mississippi, and Dr. King was coming to tour Greenwood, Mississippi. And I was a director there, so it was my job to bring him into Greenwood, Mississippi. And Greenwood, Mississippi didn't play, they would kill him. Matter of fact, the Klan said they'd killed him. So the SCLC people were saying, well, do you think? I said, listen, I'm controlling this. Send him in here, we got him covered. So when Dr. King came, I'd already arranged, but it wasn't me, the local people decide everything. They said, well, we're not gonna let Dr. King get killed here, because if he get killed here, you know what they say about us? I said, you're right. So we're gonna have one car, guns in front, one car in the back. I said, you better put some in between the buildings too. So when Dr. King came, I went, I met him, I brought him in, sat down, everybody was in there. So I said, Dr. King, I said, I want you to pay attention in the front and in the back. These are cars with guns in them, So I think it was Bernard Lee who was next to him. He said, guns! I said, yes, Dr. King. You see, I already know Dr. King's history. When Dr. King's house was dynamited in Birmingham, in Montgomery, when he first started in the mid-50s, he went out and told his congregation that he was nonviolent. They told him, that's cool, but they're going to put bodyguards around his house. And they did. And they told him, you can say whatever you want to say. We put them there. So Bernard said, guns? I said, yes. He said, what happened? I said, well, Dr. King, if you couldn't stop the people in Montgomery, Alabama, putting guns in your house, how little old me gonna stop them from protecting you with guns here and there? So I make this point because the biggest obstacle or the biggest contradiction we had was over the question of nonviolence. And the contradiction was a contradiction based on Dr. King's era. Dr. King's era was that he took nonviolence, which was a tactic, and made it a principle. Being an honest man, he came to compound the error. Being an honest man, he knew he had to hold on to the principle. Therefore, he was forced to say the only underline the word only, the only way we can achieve our liberation is through nonviolence. Malcolm X at that time correctly said to Dr. King, Dr. King, nonviolence can only be a principle in a world that is nonviolent. And the assassination of Dr. King proved the correctness of Malcolm's axiom. So if you will look at any of those films back in the 60s, you will see that I'm a disciplined fighter. You will look and see me in nonviolent demonstrations, being knocked down from stools, cigarettes being put out, being kicked, but getting right back up and sitting there. As a matter of fact, I'm very proud of my nonviolent discipline. Only once have I broken discipline, and that was on the Meredith March, when a police officer went for Dr. King, and I went for the police officer. And at that meeting of that night, I told Dr. King, you know me. I've never broken violence, and I never will. I've never broken discipline, and I never will. I'm a soldier. I said, but you tell all your white folk you know, the day they touch you, nonviolence is over. Yes, sir. Nonviolence is over. And of course, when he died, exactly what happened. So my only disagreement with him was on this question of nonviolence. Of course, me, I use it as a tactic. If nonviolence can work, well, my history has demonstrated I will use it. If it can't work, I'm chucking a hand grenade because I'm going to be free. That's the difference between Dr. King and I. I've always had great appreciation of Dr. King, and let me tell you, my greatest appreciation of Dr. King, he was an honest man. He would not compromise. They could not buy him out, and they could confuse him, but once he saw the truth, he would grab it. Africans seem to have a monopoly of corrupt leadership. Finding one as honest as King is like finding a diamond in a pigsty. His honesty was nothing less than sterling. He would criticize himself before everyone publicly. If you would listen to his speech, Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam, he has a statement in there, cuts. He said, there's a point when caution can become cowardice. He was speaking about himself. His caution on the Vietnam War would lead him to cowardice, and he had the guts to say that publicly, so that he was saying it to the FBI. If you think I'm a coward, I got news for you. I've been cautious, you've done nothing, now I'm going to show you who's who. I'm ready to meet my death, but I'm going to take a stand against this war in Vietnam. Therefore, my admiration and love for King can only grow because I know that when a great man, a great woman dies, the longer they're dead, the greater they become. So I was laughing at all those who assassinated King. I said, look at them, they don't even know anything. Soon they're going to have to give him a holiday.